Okay, welcome back. I'd like to continue. So we saw these Spotify and Twitter examples. Right? There's examples that you can use for your documentation, but they might also be useful as to get some idea or some intuition of what the realistic setting would be for an example like assignment 3. Right? So it's now extremely simplified with this simple phone database with only these basic operations. But I hope you can see that in principle it is the same thing that Twitter and that Spotify do, right? So in the case of Spotify, they have a big database with music content, and you can get access to the data, to the metadata in the database. In the case of Twitter, right, they have a big database with all the tweets, your own tweets, but also the public tweets of other people that you can use to build up your own web applications on top of that database. The same is true for assignment 3. I think what is important is that your job in assignment 3 is to provide only that API. Right? Don't provide the whole application built on top of that. So somebody needs to use your API, right, in the end, but it will be typically somebody that is building a web application like you did in assignment 2. Right? So what you build on the client side on top of your API is not part of the assignment. It is part of the bonus, right? So if you can make your assignment 2 work with your own database instead of our database, then you can get some bonus points. But the core of assignment 3, right, is really only the server-side API. Okay. So the situation that we're in, right, is that we have the client, the browser. We're now inside the server environment. So you need to program a web server. Typically, you don't do that from scratch. You use some kind of a framework. So for assignment 3, the framework we will be using will be Node.js with this Express module that is explained in the Zybook. But there are many different server frameworks. So my first tip to you will be play a little bit around with this Node.js Express framework. Just make something simple. Check if the example code that we provide actually works on your machine, right? That you can start it up without getting error messages. That you can send a request to it, for example, using your browser. That you can see the response. That you change a little bit in the server, that you get a different response, then test it again, etc. So just play a bit around with this part to get used to this server framework. But then in real life, many of these server frameworks, they need to connect to a database, typically SQL database. Right? So you need some way to make this connection. And that's also true for assignment 3, right? So all these server frameworks, including Node.js, but also if you would do this in Python or in PHP or in whatever language, Java, they have all kinds of different modules to connect to an SQL database and to get some functionality out of that combination web server database. Right? So one that's typically used is these template engines. So there's a chapter in the Zybook about this, which uses content in the database to fill the content of your HTML page, right? So then always the trick is how do you get the HTML code and the data from the database in the right combination to make a server-side dynamic web page automatically. And there's code for that. We're not going to use that in the assignment. So we're going to purely use the SQL data because we want to have access to the data part. And oops, what was that? And in the Zuidboek, the assumption is that you have already your SQL database running. Right? So you have a separate MySQL database or a Mongo database or whatever running, and what you do is you connect your server-side environment to this running database. And I think that is the typical real-world situation. It also, if you want to use that for your assignment, it requires you to set up an entire real-life SQL server. And I think for this assignment, that's a bit too much overkill. So we're going to do the lightweight solution, and we're going to use a so-called embedded database. So if you start up your server framework, it will just have a lightweight SQL server inside it. So you don't need to start up and install a separate database, right? And we're going to use the SQLite module for that. That is not covered in the Zuidboek, so that's a bit unfortunate, but it is really a lot simpler to install and to maintain and to use in the assignment. So there is some quick tutorial around it if you want to know more. I think if you start with the example code and the examples that we provide, strictly speaking, you may not even need the tutorial. The examples are intended to be enough. So other frameworks have similar things. So I want to go back to the assignment itself now in the Zuidboek part. So my tip would be to really start playing a bit around, right, and do these baby steps. But definitely do the activities in the Zuidboek, 9.1 to 9.3, right? But also play a little bit around with a command line shell, right? So the examples in the Zuidboek assume that you use this. And I also assume in my documentation for the example code that you do this. So if you have never seen this, please do that now, because I think it's useful also in other courses in your career. It's not that hard. So if you look at chapter 9, right, which is the last chapter we will cover from the Zuidboek, there are these initial startup sections, right? So this is introduction to Node.js in general. This is more the practical details, how to start it up. This is how to use this Express web framework that makes it easy to write actual web applications inside this environment. PUG or PUG is this template framework, right? I want you to understand what template frameworks are for the exam, but you don't need it for the assignment. So if you start with these three, you will get the gist of how to operate, how to program in the server-side environment. Then this is about relational databases. If you're more or less familiar with SQL, then this should all be easy for you. If you have never seen it, right, just try to get the high-level basics of it. Again, I will not ask you to write SQL queries on the exam, right? So try to understand the examples and allow them to the extent that you can actually use them yourself in your code, but don't spend too much time on this. And then we have here the chapter how to connect from the notebook, from the Zuidboek, from the Node.js environment to your separate MySQL database, right? So I think it is good if you understand that in principle. The principles are very similar to the lightweight thing that we're going to use. I think our solution is easier, right? Here again, try to understand the principles, but not the details of the actual implementation. Then there are two optional things that we're going to skip, and then there is this more background on how to do this RESTful stuff, right? So all the things that I just explained to you is back here, but here they do we're going to do both client-side and server-side approach if we're going to make a real web application. That's for a real web application. You need to do both client-side and server-side. That's the approach here. On Thursday last week, I got from different people questions about this section of people that were confused. Is this client-side? Is this server-side? Well, it's both. And that's because they try to approach it from this, if you're going to do a real-world application, you need to do both the client-side and the server-side, and they do it both. So here you need to be careful if you're looking at examples, that you understand whether this is the server-side code or the client-side code. Is that clear? If this is confusing, then I think you can, in the beginning, stick with the first 3 subsections. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I want to quickly go through what is covered, right? So again, here they explain this difference between front-end and back-end, where back-end is both the server itself and the database that you're using typically. Different environments. You need to do some server-side programming. You need to pick a language. There is this notion of how this API works. So we need a database. So here is an example of another of these template engines, right? So this is really there to be just an example. Also there, just don't pay too much attention to it. So I think in 9.2, right, they start with really the syntax details on what you actually need to do to write a Node.js program. And one of the, I think the cool ideas about Node.js is that the environment itself provides very little, right? But the modules that are available for Node.js provide quite a lot, right? So if you don't want all these details, right, you only need to download or install the modules that you need. So that makes the whole thing really lightweight if you want to make something lightweight, but also very rich if you need all this functionality. Now, what Node.js in itself offers you, right, is this host environment that we talked about in the JavaScript client case, where in the client side it's your browser that gives you the JavaScript interpreter and all the things that you need access to, the DOM, etc. Now on the server side, right, you also need a JavaScript host environment, and Node.js is now your host environment, right? So Node.js allows you to execute JavaScript on the server side, not in your browser, but in the server. So that's basically the only thing it provides. Then we have this module manager, the Node package manager, NPM, that allows you to install all these modules that you need, right? And you are going to need at least 2 of them, namely this Express module and the SQLite module. So you also need to get a little bit of accustomed to installing modules. So please follow the tutorials there. And then you will see that that Node.js will typically start an HTTP server listening to port 3000, right? So we already saw you always need a port, right? And the default is port 80. So why doesn't it not just open a port on port 80, but 3000, which is unusual? Anyone? So one is that there's a potential security risk, right? So port 80 will be the port also externally used. So before you know it, you are playing around with Node.js and you have a real web server that is available to the rest of the world if the security of your environment is not very good. So that's one reason. There's a very strong technical reasons is that on Windows, as a normal user, you're typically allowed to open a server on port 80. If you're on a Mac or on Linux, You're not even allowed to open port 80 as a normal user. You need to be super user or admin or whatever to do so. So to have a default port like 3000 allows Node.js to open a server on any device, right? So that means that in your, if you test it, right, in your browser, you need to specify this port explicitly, right? So if you open it on your own machine, the standard domain name for your own machine is localhost, right? So you don't need to have an internet connection to test this in your browser. If you use the URI http://localhost 3000, then your browser will send a request to your own Node.js server. So that's good to realize. Now installing these modules that you need, right? I would just play around a little bit with that. If you get fed up, you can just start again, right? Throw away everything, but just do a little bit of playing around with this, that you know what's going to happen, and if something is wrong, what you can do to fix it. So one of the important things that you need to understand is that I think that is here, right? That you will have a local directory, a local folder in your working directory, which is called node modules. And every module that you're going to install is being installed locally in there, right? So if you think, oh, I have installed 5 modules and I don't need them anymore, you just throw away that folder and you start again with installing the modules that you do need, and everything should work fine again. Right, so the basic way of working is that you start with a fresh new directory. I think in the Zybook it's always called My Project. So start with a new folder, and in that folder you have the basic program file that contains your server code, right? So typically that is something called server.js. So you can start with downloading our example server.js. Then you have something to start with, right? But then the first thing I would do is install these modules that you need, right? So then you will get another folder here, node modules. That will, the installation process will do it for you. And then things like Express and SQLite will be installed there, and other things that you may need. If you have done this, right, so you have installed the Express and MySQLite, then you should be able to run this server and get a very basic server already working that you can try if it actually works, right? Because otherwise something else is wrong. Maybe you have the wrong version of Node, or you have thought you put this in a directory, but it's actually another directory, etc., etc. Really try this, and then try to modify it and to extend it with little baby steps. That would be my recommendation. Now what you will see is that in the beginning, if you do this, Node will complain and give a lot of error messages because you don't have an essential file which is called package.json. And the Zybook in 9.2 already shows you how you can make a package JSON file. So also my recommendation would be do this, right? So if you call should be an example of that. If you call npm.init, so the package manager init, it will make a package.json file for you. And that's basically the, it's a JSON file, right? It contains JSON data, but it contains JSON data about your project. And it contains all the dependencies, right? But it can also will contain your own name, right, as the author of the project. But it can also contain dependencies on these modules, right? So all the things that you need to document about your own project, you can put in this package.json file. And you can also document how to start the server, how to stop it, how to test it. So that's also good practice, right? Developers expect this package.json file to be there, so it's good practice to use that and to make sure that it contains all the things people expect it to have. And if you read the assignment closely, you will get hints on what you should put in there. Okay, so of these three essential sections, right, 993 is about this Express module that gives you the basic functionality you need to write a web server. And basically, right, what you need for a server, right, is something that listens to this port 3000, right, and can handle incoming requests. And for every request that comes in, right, there's typically a URI, so you need to be able to respond to the right request on the right URI with the right piece of code. So in assignment 2, right, we had these handler functions responding to events. Here we have handler functions responding to incoming requests. And this is the basic way to do this, right? So suppose the app is your server-side application, right? It's the Express environment. What you say for every GET request that comes in on this URL, right? So this is localhost 3000/hello, call this handler function. And for every post request coming in on goodbye, call this handler function. And on and on and on, right? So if you do this for every potential URL on your website, you have a complete web server. In your case, there are 5 functions that you need to implement, right? So I expect 5 of these functions with get and put and post and delete, and maybe another get for assignment 3. So if you have 5 of these type of functions, you should be done. And if you can implement each of them with very small amount of code, right? I've seen people fulfilling all the requirements of assignment 3 in like half a page of JavaScript, and they had 100 out of 100 points for the assignment. So it's not a lot of work. It doesn't need to be a lot of work. So if you can solve it really quickly, don't be worried that you're doing the wrong thing. You might be doing exactly the right thing. And by the way, these things that from the server side respond to a specific URI, this specific URI pattern is called a route. Because basically what you're doing, right, is that the request comes in at the server, and then the Node.js routes the request to the right handler function. That's where the name comes from. Doesn't mean anything more technical than that, just the right function for the right URI. So these are routes. Then there are lots of things to help you write your code if you need more specific stuff, which you don't need for the assignment. So I think if you stop with this and here from after 9.3 switch to this quickly to this SQLite tutorial. What's this? So if you go to the public SQLite tutorial for Node.js, you will get a page like this, and it just shows you with a short database what to do if you want to do the key things that you want in the database, right? So connecting to the database, querying from a table, insert data into the table, updating and deleting. Right? For each there is a simple page. So if you got stuck with SQLite, go here. But again, I don't think you need this if you just look at our example code and start from there. So then let's look at the example code. Right, so if you look at the modules, in week 3, there's the typical learning goals and tips and assignments, but there's also this example code. And what you will get is a piece of code that has mainly comments in it. Right, so there's a lot of comments, but there's a variable that, or constant that connects you to your database. So this is the SQLite module that we import here. So this require is basically the import statement of Node.js, right? Look that we put on error messages on verbose. That's handy if there's something goes wrong. You want as much as information as possible about what's going wrong. And it creates a database which stores the data in this file phones.db. Right? So after you run the server for the first time, you also have a phones.db file in your directory which holds the information that is in your database. Now, that is nice because if your database stops or crashes, or you just stop it because you want to fix it and start it again, all the data will still be in the database, right? Because if not, it would start empty again every time you start the server, which makes it a lot harder to test, right? So this phone database will contain all your phone data. Now, if there are 100 phones in your database and your reset function doesn't work anymore, you just throw away this phones database file, you start your server again, and you have a fresh new database. Right? It's very easy. So these two lines set up the basic database. These two lines set up your Express server-side framework, right? So now we have a variable app for which we can define these routes. I put one route already there, /hello, right? So now localhost colon 3000/hello should return this hello world, right? In JSON, and then I send the response back in JSON back to the browser. Right? So that's what the route does. And that's not very useful for the assignment, right? So if everything works, you can delete this one, but this is an easy one to test if your server actually is doing something. Right? So my recommendation would be make sure that if you type in localhost 3000/hello, you get this response, right? And if you do get a response, change it a little bit and try it again. And if you still get the same response, then you know that your server is still doing the old code, right? You need to restart it, etc. So baby steps, one at a time. Now you will see also that this not set explicitly any headers, right? So it doesn't tell the browser it's JSON. It doesn't tell the browser that it's a 200 code to make sure that everything works, right? That's still your job for the assignment. I also gave you one database example, right, to get you started. So the example route is called DB example. So if you test it with localhost 3000/DB example, it should give you back all the content in the database where the brand is the brand of my phone, right? Also, just as an example. So this will just run this SQL query and will return back the result. Actually, now see that I commented out this one. Okay, so it will actually do all the things that you need. Right, and again, There's no error checking, no response codes that will do something useful in case something goes wrong. That's your job, but you can use this for whatever purpose you want. Right, we start the server after defining the routes, and then I have some helper functions that I use. Right, you can also create your own helper functions. This helper function will create a database if it does not exist. So every time you start a server, it will check, does this database file exist? If not, make one, and it will create a table if the table is not already there, and it will put in an example phone so the database is not empty. Right? If you don't like my phone to be in there, feel free to delete it. But I think for testing purposes, right, it's easier if there's something in your database. So again, the advice is to use this, right? You can use it for whatever you want. If you think, hey, all the phones from the database, that's actually the first requirement, you may be right, and you can keep it like this. If you don't want to use it and you want to delete everything and replace it by your own code, right, that's fine too. I don't feel insulted if you don't use my code, even better. So do whatever you want with this. But if you do decide not to use it, right, at least make sure that you have the environment and that this works on your own computer before you change it. Okay, now I want to go back to the details of the assignment because I think now they should make more sense. So for every of these 5 functions, right, you need to define a route like this. We have to write get, put, delete, post, right? Anytime you use get, it should be safe. Anytime you use post, it does not need to be idempotent, but all the other ones that you use should be idempotent. All the input-output should be JSON, right? You should use the right HTTP headers. So think a little bit what would be useful headers. It could be that Express already sets these headers for you, right? It could be that you need to do them yourself. So use your developer tools in your browser to check what are the headers I send to my server, right? And what are the headers that the server sends back? And are these the right headers? Or do I need to change something? And same for the response codes, right? So think about what are good response codes. Now again, all these things, right? If web developers are going to use your database, they need to know about this, right? So you need to write some minimal documentation that explains, okay, what is the URI for my route? What is the JSON that I expect as input? What is the JSON that you can expect as output? What are the response codes that you can expect if things go right? What are the response codes if things go wrong? And if you document that correctly, right, in a way that conforms to these REST principles, you can score a lot of points. So if either your documentation or your implementation shows that you understand all these REST principles, right, that are already 30 points to be earned. If the documentation does it correctly, it's 20 points, right? Then you can get some points for style, right? So even if you leave out the implementation, you can still get more than half of the points, right? So for those of you who think, okay, this implementation is very difficult, I can only do half of it. If you do half of the implementation plus the documentation correctly, you will still pass this assignment easily. So don't give up too easily on, I think the server-side code is too abstract and too complicated and too technical. I've seen a lot of people doing this documentation instead, right? And then when they did the documentation, they think, oh, actually, I do understand what I need to do. And they also scored very well on the implementation side. If you're comfortable with the implementation, right, and you want to do the implementation first, and then document exactly what you implemented, also fine. Right? Whatever suits you. But don't give up on the technical side too easily and think you cannot make this assignment. Okay. I'm thinking, I have a feeling I forgot something. Oh yeah, I did forget something. So, how to test this, right? So, if you want to test your get functions, you can just add the URI, enter the URI of your route into your browser, right? You say localhost // whatever your route is. You send, and your browser will send a get message to your server, and you can test it like that. But how to send a delete message to your server? How to send a put, right? You can technically send a post if you enter, do your form a bit, but it's not very convenient. So for testing these things, there are special programs. The curl program that we showed is one example, but there are easier and more user-friendly tools for this, and the one that is discussed in the Zybook, and also the one that we recommend, is called Postman. Right? It's a graphic interface specifically for sending all kinds of requests in all kinds of using all kinds of methods to your browser, and it will show you the response. It will show you the error codes. So even if you haven't done this already, I would definitely do so. Forgot to put it here. So this is the environment, right? You can download the app, and what it will look like.